I am in lockstep with you about Kyle Lowry being number one. And I've said for years, and you might not agree with this part, I've said for years, I think Vince Carter should absolutely have his 15 retired. And Vince's career is probably done now because of, COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything else. He's done. But because he's first to retire does not mean he's first to hang from the rafters. He has to wait his turn. The place in history that Kyle Lowry has carved out as the champion now and for all he's done, number 7 needs to be the first. After that, you want to put up number 10 for DeRozan, you want to put up 15 for Vince, fine. I don't think that I'm putting up 2 because to me, a jersey retired doesn't just represent one season as fantastic, as incredible as it was. It represents an entire career. It represents what you did for the organization, for the city, for tenure overall. And I'm not saying this as any knock or criticism on Kawhi. I just don't think you do it.
I'm sorry, but I know he was only here for a year, but what he did for the city, the franchise, and everything, he might as well have been here for 20 years.
All right. See, but these are the arguments or the conversations that'll go on for years to come, no doubt. I wouldn't do it, but you want to put a statue up, you want to put a mural up, a picture. I'll tell you, here's the other thing too. And again,
what is the problem here? The hockey guy is saying that Kawhi Leonard's number should be retired, and the basketball guy who got to cover one of the greatest things in sports history in Canada isn't doing it. What is wrong with this picture?
Again, I've used this line a couple times in our chat here over the last 40 minutes or so. I'm going to split hairs a little bit. I like what the Blue Jays have done, and I know other organizations in pro sports have done this, but to me, you want to have like a wall of excellence where you're honoring certain numbers and honoring certain players, and then that way they're still immortalized to some degree, fine, but you're saving the actual retired jerseys for the best of the best, for the Alomars, for the Hallidays, etc. I think you want to honor number 2, fine, but I'm not retiring number 2. That's just me.
Well, you're wrong, but we'll just continue the conversation.
I feel like I've heard that before from you and my wife and many others as well. So let me ask you this. I'm going to go back then for a second here. You're at the Fan. You decide to go to Headline Sports. Yeah. Headline Sports becomes the Score. You were there for what? 4 years, 5 years? How long were you at the?
6 years.
6.
Yeah.
And then you go to CBC.
Yeah.
So what ultimately led to the moves? I mean, take us through that from going from radio to TV and then transitioning from the Score into CBC and then ultimately into the family of Hockey Night in Canada, Sportsnet, etc.
Well, for Fan to Score, it was just time to try something new. I wanted, I've told you this, and I said it earlier. The first time I ever interviewed for TV, I was told I would never be on TV because I wasn't good looking enough. And I just felt that I wanted to prove that I was good enough that even if I was a -6 out of 10, I could get on television. And that's why I went to the Score. I wanted to prove I could do it. And to go to Hockey Night, Scott Russell left Hockey Night after the 2003 Stanley Cup final. And I just said, and they had an opening and I didn't apply. And somebody called me in September and they said, "You never applied?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, we're not offering you the job. We want you to interview." And so I said, "Okay, like Eric, I try not to be a big self-promoter. I'm a big believer that if people respect your work and think you're good work and they want you, they'll come find you." And so that was the reason I interviewed. And I went through 2 interviews and I got the job. And I was shocked. I didn't think I was getting it. The rumor was I wasn't going to get it. I got it, and the rest is history. And I just went to Sportsnet when Sportsnet got the rights. But, it's been unbelievable. I'm coming up on 17 years now. And, I'm very lucky to say that I've gotten farther in my career than I ever would have dreamed I could have.
Listen, I certainly don't want to put you in a bad spot by asking this, but I'm going to ask it anyways, and you can decide how you're going to answer. You're fully entrenched and ingrained in the hockey community and hockey broadcast, the hockey culture, and the 31 Thoughts podcast and the column as well, etc. You are synonymous with Hockey Night in Canada now and have been for years. But you've covered a ton over the course of your career, from going back to your radio days and all the sports you covered, let alone in television as well. You've talked about basketball. You've done play-by-play for the Raptors. You've covered football. You've hosted CFL broadcasts. You've done play-by-play in the Olympics for multiple sports. you've covered the Jays. Do you miss at any point doing other sports, or do you like being fully entrenched in one sport, one league specifically, and focusing all your attention on that?
One of the things I liked about not doing other sports, Eric, is I can watch them for fun. That's one of the things that, I can watch the Blue Jays for fun. I can watch the Raptors for fun. But, like last year, as I told you earlier, how awesome would it have been to cover the Raptors winning the NBA championship? I bought tickets to see the Blue Jays in their 2 playoff runs, but I was jealous of Jamie Campbell, the guys who got to cover that, like Shai Davidi, because I think it would be awesome to be in the middle of that. So I think it's a mix. I like the fact that if I'm watching the Raptors on TV, I can just enjoy the game and not have to think of an angle. But when they're really good and when the stakes are high and the playoffs are on, I'm like, damn, I wish I was there.
Take me back to some of those original years with the Raptors. And I often say this, but, whether it be from your perspective covering it and now watching, as you just said, as a fan, or whether it be just kind of looking at it professionally. To go from 16-66 and 22-60 and the lean years that existed with this squad, to see where they are now, and to see, as you referenced earlier, the numbers for a replay of a broadcast, let alone the numbers that the Raptors are now getting in terms of television ratings for ball games. Did you see it happening? Some might say it was a long slow burn, but I would still say fairly quickly. Did you see it happening this quickly, and did you foresee basketball being at one point kind of parallel to hockey in terms of interest, in terms of numbers, and sort of captivating the national audience the way that the Raptors did over the course of the last 12 months, if not even the last couple of years?
Well, Eric, I always thought it would, and I hoped it would, but for me, it actually took longer than I thought. It did. I thought it would have been earlier than this, but I'm glad it happened. I've said this many times, though, those first couple years covering the Raptors were so good for me. Like, I was a middle-class Jewish guy out of Toronto, and all that came in, all of these guys who I had nothing in common with. I didn't know anything about their back. I mean, I knew them as a reporter. I knew where they came from and where they went to college, but we didn't have a lot in common with our backgrounds. And what I learned was you could reach an understanding and a respect for each other as long as you respected each other. And I didn't travel a lot, but I was there every day. Every practice I was at, every home game I was at. And they knew that. And they saw the effort I put in. I saw the effort they put in. I asked a lot of what they thought were good questions about their games and their craft and how they worked on their craft and things like that. And I learned so much. I learned that because people didn't come from the same background as you and didn't seem to have a lot in common with you, that didn't mean you couldn't try to understand each other and understand the way people did their jobs. And I remember when Doug Christie's wife ripped Toronto. So I did a story about it, and she was furious about all the reporting, and she walked up to me, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm dead." And she goes to me, because Doug Christie's wife tough, and she said to me, "You know what? At least you were fair. I didn't like everything you said, but you were fair." And I was like, "Oh, okay." That's the only thing I've ever really cared about. Am I fair? Yeah. And I just thought that was a lot. I learned a lot just about life from those guys. And, I think, Eric, it took longer than I thought it would. And there were times I really worried. Before Masai got to Toronto, I really worried about what was going to happen to the team. I knew they were committed. I knew they weren't going anywhere. But I didn't know if they would ever really grab it. And then last year, they grabbed it. And look, people talk about who's bigger, the Raptors or the Leafs. I've always thought it was a stupid argument. I think there's plenty of room for both. But last year, there were people in Canada who've never watched the Raptors. You saw how big it was. I'm happy for the people in that organization who've been there for a long time. To see their dreams rewarded and to know that they've made it as an organization, those are the people I was and the Raptor fans who've really been fans for a long time, those are the people I was happy for.
You know, it's interesting, Elliotte. I'm glad you brought it up, and maybe we've known each other too long because I was kind of going to go there. I always find it interesting, and listen, it's not criticism on hockey fans versus basketball fans or vice versa, criticism of basketball fans versus hockey. I've never understood why there seems to be this mentality or this thought process with a lot of fans, and I'm not saying all, but with a lot of fans where you can't seem to like both. If you're a basketball fan of basketball, it's ridiculous. Why can't you like both? Why can't you be into hockey as well as basketball, let alone soccer, baseball, football, and everything else? Why can't you just be a sports fan? It seems like people feel like you're honing in on their territory, or you're taking some sort of clout, some sort of spotlight away from their sport, their team, if you're talking Raptors instead of talking Canucks, or if you're talking Flames instead of Raptors, or if suddenly the Blue Jays are getting more play and the Jets or the Senators aren't getting enough. It's like, come on. I mean, we're all just sports fans, and there should be plenty to go around for all of us to watch and be interested in. And listen, at the end of the day, it should be pretty obvious what the lead story is on most nights based on whether it's the playoffs, whether it's a winning streak, whether it's, I mean, we're all not stupid, all the audience out there. You know which teams sell most, which teams draw the highest ratings. And at the end of the day, the media and broadcasting, it is a business. You're going to go with what sells first, but there's still plenty of pie to cut up and give everybody a slice.
Well, you know, it was unique for us last year because it was obvious, like, with the Boston-St. Louis Stanley Cup, that people didn't care as much in Toronto about, like, I could tell our own employers cared more about the NBA final than they did about the Stanley Cup. And that was weird, and it was different, and it was unique, and it was good for me to see that perspective. Because sometimes it's good to be knocked off the perch and be challenged and say, okay, how are we going to find our way back? But I think the whole thing is just dumb. But the one thing that I do think, Eric, is I hope that, like, sometimes the basketball personality stuff has been insane. Like, it goes way, way, way over there. But I think hockey needs to move in that direction. I think our players need to be willing to show more of their personalities like the basketball players do. And I think if there's anything, like, I will tell you last year, the one thing I thought was really interesting was there was one NHL player who said to me about the final. He said NHL has to market their players better. And this was right before the Stanley Cup final and the NBA final. And I said to this player, you watch the NBA final. You watch that every day the star players are at the podium. Every day the star players talk. NHL isn't always like that. On off days, it's just not the way the sport is. And last year, Sportsnet, they were doing what, Eric, like 3-4 hour shows on off days, just the podium.
Yeah.
And this player got back to me, and he was like, holy cow, was that a revelation? And that's where we need to go.
All right, let me ask you this, seeing as you brought it up. I don't know if it's fair to single out one guy, but you know, as an outsider who's just a fan, I've interviewed him a couple of times at basketball games, but I've never talked to him in a professional setting within the rink, within the hockey parameters. Why is it that a guy like PK Subban, he's the first guy that comes to mind for me when I think about personalities in hockey. Why is it that he seems to have more critics than fans sometimes? Is it because the culture still is not accepting of it yet and accepting of guys that are a little bit more out there and showing a little bit more personality and it's supposed to be more team? Or what's your sense of why PK seems to maybe take some heat from folks?
I think those are very good questions. I mean, you know, I think that there's a couple of things. Like, I think there are people who really support what PK does. I think there are a lot of people who think that PK, what he's done is the right thing, and that history will judge him positively for all of the social media work he does. And I generally seem to think of that too. I will say this, Eric. I think the people I know who have been critical of PK will say that sometimes he doesn't know when enough is enough. And I think that, you know, when a team isn't doing as well, it's harder for that kind of stuff to happen. And I think that those are the criticisms that I've ever heard about PK. I think most people realize that the social media stuff he does is good, is positive. And I think that in particular, his charity about bringing together police with average fans to go to games together, that's one of the great things I think any athlete has done in recent memory. And I think it's fantastic. I just think that the biggest critique PK gets is know when to say when. And I think that's why there is some backlash. And look, I don't like to criticize him for it. I'm just telling you what the answer is.
All right, no, I appreciate that. And Elliotte, we've probably got about 10 minutes left here, and I appreciate hanging in for the first episode here, and thanks again for joining me. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least ask a couple of hockey-related questions, and I think the biggest question of all, and I said this to you on the phone the other day, I don't know if the hockey fans that are watching are, as we just talked about, as into the basketball world and know that when it comes to basketball, it's Shams Charania and it's Adrian Wojnarowski that are breaking every story. I don't even try to break stories half the time now. If I happen to get lucky enough that somebody tells me something, I'm going to get the information out there. But Shams and Adrian and Woj, they are locked in to the back pocket of everybody in the league, every agent, you name it. They know what's what before it even comes out. Adam Schefter in the National Football League. But when I think, hockey in Canada, there are a handful of guys that are the ones that seem to be plugged in that have the info, and you're one of those handful of guys. So I have to ask you, we're in the midst of this. We're all dying as sports fans for whether it be basketball, baseball, hockey, football, something to come back. I think we all would agree nothing should come back until it's ultimately 100% safe for the athletes, for the coaches, let alone for the fans. But where do you think things are right now with the National Hockey League in terms of where their mindset is about how things could unfold in the coming weeks and months for either the season resuming or squashing the season and looking ahead to next year?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that all of the commissioners and these leagues are sharing notes. So when Adam Silver does an interview last night with Ernie Johnson on Twitter, and he says there's no decisions being made in April, I don't think that's just Adam Silver talking. I think that's Adam Silver talking, Gary Bettman talking, and Rob Manfred talking. So that's where we are. And I agree with you. Safety first. No question about this. Nobody wants to come back and then there's a test, positive test, and we all have to shut this down. So I think the biggest question is, Eric, when are we going to be able to test people? Like, when are we going to be able to say everybody can be tested and we can know if they are positive or not? To me, like, everybody's talking vaccine. We aren't going to have a vaccine for 18 months. There's no way the world's going to be a standstill for 18 months. You just can't do it. So I think the biggest thing is going to be testing. And, I've heard rumors they're hoping testing in June. So I think that we're probably looking – I don't think we're going to know anything until the middle of June. And I think all these leagues are going to try to go sometime in July, August, September. And until they're told they can't do this, that I think is going to be the target. I think it's going to be without fans at the start. Yeah. Like, Eric, to be honest, all the people who are answering questions here is, are you going to be comfortable going into a crowd? Yeah. I think we all have to ask each other that. I don't know. I don't think my wife would want me to go into a crowd like that. Well, and here's the other thing that I wonder, though. And again, I say this more as a man, as a father, as a human being, let alone as a professional. My biggest question too, Elliotte, is even when we talk about doing these, whether they're, teams are quarantined in a hotel, playing at a neutral site on an island, like Dana White buying an island for the UFC. Playing basketball games or hockey games in North Dakota or in Barbados or Hawaii or wherever it may be. It's not just the 15 or the 25 players, the coaches, a select handful of team staff. You actually are going to have at least a few people on a stats crew in the building. If you're broadcasting, if there's the whole reason to do this is to have some semblance of a season, to be able to put on television, to be able to garner some sort of revenue from these games and from these sports, you're going to have at least 4, if not 6, 8 camera folks. So now I look at that and think, all right, there's going to be anywhere from minimum 50 to 100 or more people in an arena or on a field at any given time in whatever sport we're talking about. Now when you go to that hotel,
if we assume that most of the stores and most of the restaurants and bars are still closed, then you're probably saying to these athletes, these coaches, and whomever else, you are quarantined on lockdown in this hotel. You can't leave. We are going to cater every single meal as a team, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in one of the ballrooms in the hotel. But who's prepping the food? Who's cooking the food? Who's bringing out the food? Who's working the hotel front desk? Who's the cleaning service? All that. And are those people quarantined, or are they going home at the end of their shift to see their family, to see their kids, who know full well that they're not supposed to go out because mom or dad or whomever is going to work, and they're lucky enough to have a job right now working the NHL games or the NHL hotel, the NBA, but somebody screws up one day and goes out to the store, or the kid goes to visit his girlfriend, or the kid runs out in the yard and plays with the neighbor next door, and all of a sudden goes back to the hotel and ends up infecting a coach or a player, and then boom, we're right back to square one. I just don't know how you can logically or securely 100% ensure the safety of the athletes, even if there are no fans in the arenas.
I agree with that, and that's why I think we have to wait till the summer to see where we are. We're all talking out of our butts now, Eric. We don't know.
Oh, it's just this is just opinion. Yeah.
I've always believed we're not going to know a thing at least until the end of May, and now I'm thinking at least maybe June or July. So, I mean, that's where we are. I mean, I think, and I do believe that once the time comes, if the NBA plays, the NFL, baseball, basketball, hockey, all that stuff, it's going to be like a bubble. It's going to be like Biodome, the movie. It's going to be like a bubble. And whoever's going to go in there is going to have to say, yeah, okay, I agree to go in there. And it's not ideal, but, the thing I worry about, first of all, I worry about people's health. But secondly, I worry for people financially. If the world continues to be ground to a halt, people are going to suffer that way too. And I don't know. I just think that if you can get things going at some point and it's healthy enough and you're healthy enough to do it. And again, I think proper testing is going to be the thing. I think you're going to see it happen. I think the other thing too is, Eric, I watched WrestleMania the other night, and just to see how they do it. First of all, I thought, considering there was no fans and no atmosphere, I thought they did a really good job. But secondly, apparently the numbers were really good. People are going to be saying, we want to capitalize on those numbers. And the moment they're given the chance to do it, health-wise, they're all going to be running to do it.
I think you make some excellent points, Elliotte, about, especially when it comes to I was saying to somebody today, and I've talked to my wife about it as well, I mean, how long can the local, let alone national, let alone global economy just be put on hold? I mean, at some point, people are. I'm sure that it's going to come down to what are the odds, what are the percentages, and it's now kind of a roll of the dice. Because the other thing too is, as much as we talk about all this, whether you're playing in June, July, August, whether it's in a bubble, whether it's in front of fans, no fans, otherwise, by the time cold and flu season ramps up again in late October, early November, and COVID-19 is still out there, and we're still at least 6 months away from a vaccine, what are we doing? Are we locking down again from December till March, and we're back in quarantine? I mean, there has to be some sort of contingency plan that we've now hopefully had these 4 or 5 months to work out, because otherwise we're right back to square one. We might come out of this and think, oh, life's back to normal, quasi-normal, boom, it's the fall, it's early winter, and we're right back into it again. There's got to be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel that everybody's trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, and I agree. And there's someone's comment who just went by about, mental health issues and things like that. And I think those get exacerbated in this time. And again, you have to wait until we do it, until everybody's healthy or there's proper testing or whatever it will take. But I do agree with that. We're going to need to give people something to watch at some point. And hopefully in the summer, we come up with a situation where that can happen. Because I think, I'll tell you, I would tell everybody this, and I've said it a few times now. I used to think things like meditation was hipster doofus stupidity. I believe in it now. 10 minutes a day, try to exercise, go take a walk. So important now, everybody. I've cut out sugar. I'm only allowing myself alcoholic drinks twice a day.
10 seconds, apparently. We're going to run out here.
Not twice a day, twice a week. Do it, people.